Free will is a very difficult topic, both in secular sources and the Havdalah in Jewish sources. One of the reasons it's so difficult is because when you start talking about it, it has relationships to a lot of other different subjects. So if you really wanted to get clear about it, you'd have to get clear about all those relationships. And they are also controversial. There's even a controversy, this may be hard to believe and hard to credit, but there is a controversy as to whether we have free will or we don't. Maybe free will is just an illusion. We just think we're making decisions, but really we're not. I think the right attitude towards somebody who suggests that, and there are serious people who suggest it, and there's a serious debate going on for a long time about it, the right attitude is, are you serious? This feeling that every human being has, and has it unquestionably, something you take for granted, all of us are always continuously deceived about it? You know, maybe, but boy, you'd better do a lot of work to convince me of that. I'll give you an example of how this went in ancient times. There was a philosopher named Zeno who had proofs that motion is an illusion. Motion is an illusion. Nothing moves. Nothing moves. And for more than 2,000 years, nobody could answer his arguments. He had arguments with the conclusion that nothing moves, and nobody could answer his arguments. I don't believe that in those 2,000 years, and all the millions of people who heard his arguments, there was even one who said, maybe he's right, and nothing moves. I think the attitude was, he's thought up some clever arguments, and, he's an intelligent guy, and, it would be nice to figure out why he's wrong. Because he's surely wrong. Watch. Nothing moves. There are some who think that in the middle of the 19th century it was figured out when the continuum was put on a good mathematical basis. Others disagree. But when somebody gives you an argument against something that's obvious to everyone all the time, I don't think you should curl up in a corner and give up. I think what you should think is, he's got a big job to do. He's got to overcome the experience of everyone all the time, and he'd better have a pretty good explanation of why we're wrong, where we went wrong, and exactly what's wrong with the way we look at it. And until he does that, I'm not going to budge from my intuitive understanding that, of course, we make decisions. There's a joke in philosophy about a philosopher who took a position that no one makes decisions, everything's determined. He's called the determinist. And he went to a restaurant, and the waiter said, we have meat or fish, what would you like? And the philosopher said, look, I'm a determinist, I don't believe in making any decisions, I'm just going to sit here and wait and see what happens, and see what I order. Why is that a joke? Because he just made the decision to sit and wait, didn't he? Didn't he? I mean, that's the way it looks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, there's something called, what I call philosophical balance. When somebody offers you a proof of something, there are three ways to respond. Maybe he's taught me something I didn't know. There's an infinity of primes. Is there? Isn't there? I don't know. I'm open-minded about it. The Greeks proved it. Okay, I learned something new. Or he's got an argument that nothing moves, then there's something wrong with his premises. One of his premises is a mistake. What's called modus tollens instead of modus ponens, for those who know the terminology. And the third thing is there's something wrong with his logic. His logic doesn't work. All three responses to an argument are perfectly legitimate. And which one you choose depends upon how much background knowledge you have, how much understanding you have, what possibilities you see are open. You could be wrong. You could be wrong about anything. But could be wrong isn't a good reason for giving up your plans. Is it possible that lightning will strike right outside the yeshiva in 2 hours? Yeah, it's possible. But I'm going home. I'm not going to worry about it. So when somebody says there's no such thing as free will, what we call the burden of proof is on him. Let's hear you do a good job about it. And the fact that people have been mistaken about things in the past, even things they thought were very sure, isn't much of a consideration, because although there may be 16 things about which we were very sure that we had to give up, there are 600,000 things about which we're very sure which we haven't given up. Like grass grows in the spring and not in the winter, that days are shorter in the winter than they are in the summer, that if you close off oxygen, fires will go out. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of things of which we're very sure, and they're very solid, and they're very continuous, and they don't disappear. Like, there are a few. There are a few, like, for example, thinking the earth doesn't move, and then discovering the earth does move, yeah. But that's not a good argument, since you made 6 mistakes out of 100,000, therefore, you should be 50-50 on the next crazy suggestion. That's not a good argument. So, we will talk about some of the questions about why people doubt the existence of free will, and then just defining what it is and understanding how it works. There are problems that people raise which help clarify it. Now, I'm a philosopher, and it would be wonderful if you're discussing a subject to start with a definition of the subject. But even the definition is controversial. People can't agree on how to define what free will is. So I'm going to start with a condition for free will, which is also controversial, but I think it's very intuitive. I also think it's correct. And we'll start from there and see how far that takes us, and we'll refine it as we go along. The word free in free will means free from external causation. If something external to me causes me to do what I do, that's not free will. And by cause, I mean totally determines what happens. So, for example, if someone pushes someone and he falls down, he didn't fall down of his own free will because it was an external cause that caused him to do it. Now, this external cause may be immediate, on the spot, or it might be long-term. I'll give you an imaginary example. Let's suppose George is trying to stop smoking, and one of his techniques is to go to a hypnotist to get a post-hypnotic suggestion once a week, which carries him through the week so he doesn't smoke. Thursday night, he goes to the hypnotist, and this time, in addition to telling him you're not going to smoke next week, he tells him, at 10 o'clock Monday morning, your right arm is going to swing out in front of you like this. You won't remember this when you wake up, but at 10 o'clock Monday morning, that's what's going to happen. Fine, he says, hope you have a nice smoke-free week. He pays him, and he goes his way. 10 o'clock the next Monday morning, he's visiting his friend Philip, and Philip is acquainting him with his antiquities, and on a pedestal is a 5th century Ming vase worth about $500,000. And he's talking to him about the vase, and in the corner, the grandfather clock is bonging the hour of 10. On the 10th bong, George's hand swings out and smashes the vase. And he says, and Philip says, why did you do that? My vase, $500,000. And George says, I don't know. It just went out by itself. I can't explain it. I'm as surprised as you are. Never happened to me before. My arm just went out. I don't know what to say. Did he choose to smash the vase? Clearly not. He didn't even anticipate it. He couldn't have predicted it was going to happen. But from his point of view, it came out of the blue. That's not free will. If you happen to think that your DNA, which came from your parents, and the environmental molding that you underwent in utero, after birth, in the house, and in the society, and all the rest, that molds your entire character, all your desires, all your scruples and values, and it molds the way in which your will attacks problems of decision, so that the DNA plus the environment completely determines everything you do, then you don't believe in free will. That's an external cause. We who believe in free will, and there are explicit verses that say there's free will. One verse in Deuteronomy says, I've set before you this day life and death, good and evil, therefore choose life. Torah says, choose life. That's a pretty clear statement that you're choosing. You have to work pretty hard to reinterpret that. So, whenever you can trace the causation to something which completely and totally determines what you do, that's not a free will decision. Now, I've said completely determinedly 3 times already. I'm excluding influence. External circumstances do influence your free will, but they don't take it away from you. I'll give you one example, and then I'm going to stop for discussion. If A puts a gun to B's head and says, do it or I'll kill you, does B have free will?
Yes, but he can make a really bad choice. He has the choice to make a really terrible choice that will get him killed.
Right.
It's still free will.
How do you know he has the choice, the free choice?
Because he could make a decision.
I mean, because throughout history, when people have been put to that test, thousands and thousands of them have chosen to die. All over the world. And I'm not only talking about religions now, we're talking about prisoners of war who are threatened with death if they don't give up the names and places of other soldiers, and they say no, and they die. Someone might lose his free will, that's true. Someone may just panic. It could happen, but it doesn't have to happen. Merely putting a gun to someone's head doesn't take away his free will. It just changes his choices and makes his choices more difficult. But from the fact that people have chosen to die, you see that just putting a gun doesn't deprive you of your free will. Free will just means you can make the choice. Not that it'll be easy, and not that there isn't external circumstances that influence the circumstances under which you make the choice, but it won't typically doesn't take away your free will. That could happen also. Somebody forcibly addicts you to drugs, but that's very rare. Yeah, your question.
I think you answered it, but I was going to ask, if, we say choose life, I mean, then we don't really, we have a choice, I guess, to choose life, but, there's no, in the end, there is a choice to choose life, but it's pretty, I can't think of the word for it, but it's dependent on us choosing the good to do the good rather than the bad.
Right. But no, but my point was only that we do have the choice, since the Torah actually says to us, choose life. The Torah would not tell you to do something that you couldn't do. So if it says to choose life, the Torah is committed to your being able to make choices. Some choices, some of the time. I'm not talking now about universal abilities, but someone who believes there's no such thing as free will definitely is violating that verse. That verse has to be, from our point of view, it's a non-starter because of that. Now, one of the reasons why free will is so important is because we usually assign responsibility to people only on the basis of free will. I'll give you a couple of examples now, but it's not quite as simple as I'm presenting the examples. We're going to extend it in a moment. But let's just take the case where A pushes B and B falls, and B falls on the Ming vase and smashes it. So somebody says, why did you break the vase? I think the really right answer is, I didn't. I didn't break the vase. My body fell on the vase because he pushed me. If anybody's responsible for breaking the vase, it's he, because he pushed me. And since I didn't choose to break the vase, I'm not responsible for breaking the vase. And the same is true with the hypnosis example. His arm swings out because of post-hypnotic suggestion, which he didn't ask for. He asked the hypnotist to take care of a smoking problem. And the hypnotist, out of his own bizarre, irresponsible choice, programmed in him this movement of his arm. When his arm goes out and smashes the vase, his free will played no role whatsoever in bringing about that motion, and therefore he's not responsible for it. I did change my vocabulary there, and I did it on purpose. His free will played no role. So usually what we say is you're responsible for the free choices that you make and their foreseeable consequences, and things that motions their body goes through that don't result from your free choice, you're not responsible for. There are people who suffer from muscular twitches, and often, not always, but often, those when they result in damage, it couldn't have been foreseen. It comes with no warning whatsoever, and we simply say it's a problem. It's like lightning striking. It's not his fault, because it wasn't something that was anchored in his free choice. Now, it's not quite right to say that you're only responsible for the actions you choose freely. It's not quite right. And I'll give you an example why not. I don't know if it still exists in this country, but there used to be an advertisement on the radio. If you're going out with your friends, remember, give your keys to one of your friends. Why? Because you're going out to get drunk, right? And you're going with a car? Well, if you have your keys in your pocket, you might drive the car drunk. And you don't want to do that. So before you get drunk, that's what friends are for. It's a very bitter commentary on a certain segment of the Israeli population. That's what friends are for, to protect you from driving your car drunk. Now let's suppose a person doesn't follow that advice. He gets drunk, gets in his car, starts driving, and he smashes into something. Somebody says to him, "You smashed into that thing." And he says, "I didn't choose to smash into it." Well, that's true. He didn't choose it. He didn't even see it. He was driving blind drunk. Does that excuse him?
No.
Not really, because he also didn't choose to give his keys to his friend. And that choice led to the circumstance in which he didn't have free will. So it can be that through a free will choice you get to a circumstance where you don't have free will, and when that circumstance causes damage, you can be responsible for it. So it isn't just actions that you actually chose you're responsible for. You're responsible for the actions that you chose and their consequences, which may lead you to do things without free will. About 5 years ago, there was a report on an international flight, and the co-pilot was very drowsy. It turned out that he had been up for the 36 hours before the flight straight. Well, at a certain point, you can't help falling asleep, right? Too bad. But you shouldn't have gotten in the cockpit knowing that you haven't slept in 36 hours. That he chose to do. So if anything had happened to the plane, he definitely would have been responsible. Now this has an effect on the local consequences of what you do, and has a long-term effect also. What about a person who undertakes a training program which creates for himself a habit? He has, let's say, a bad habit, and it's costing him, and that habit causes him to do things which he knows he shouldn't do, and he wants to break the habit, and he wants to replace it with a better habit. I knew a fellow a million years ago who was into bodybuilding, and he was big, and he was strong, and he wasn't gentle. And from time to time, other people's bones broke. He underwent a training program whereby he learned to be more gentle with the way he treated people. Now let's imagine that that training program takes 2.5 years, and after 2.5 years, the habit is ingrained. It's ingrained so that now, when he interacts with people, he doesn't think about it, make a choice. Shall I break his arm or shall I not break his arm? Breaking his arm doesn't enter his mind, and he's trained his behavior to be careful for other people. It gets to the point where if someone would say, "Would you go over and break his arm?" He'd say, "No, I don't do that. I can't do that. What are you talking about? That's not me." So after the 2.5-year training program, he's not making decisions anymore to be gentle, but that training program is something he undertook with his own free will. According to our sources, Rav Dester says this, he gets credit for the successful operation of the habit for the rest of his life, just as if he were undergoing the same decisions and the same struggle as he did during the training program. So you can use your free will to create responsibility for certain areas of your life, which then go on automatic pilot, and you remain responsible for them. And the same thing is true for bad habits. There are training programs that are designed to instill bad habits. Of course, they don't call them bad habits, and they might even honestly believe that they're not bad habits, but they're bad habits anyway. I remember a program, this is probably before your grandparents were born, but I remember a program which was called What's in It for Number One? Train yourself on any interaction or any plan of action to make sure that you get the profit. Number one isn't God. Number one isn't your parents. Number one is you. And the complaint was people are taking advantage of you, and you're a patsy for others. You're not looking out for yourself. Make sure you check what's in it for number one. And there's a training program to make you more focused on what's in it for yourself. It's a training program in selfishness. And that can be done. You can train yourself to conquer your natural generous impulses and your sympathy for other people, and to structure everything in terms of its immediately egotistical benefit. So then when you become, not you, somebody becomes that kind of selfish, self-interested programmed agent, and does it now by habit because he instilled it by his own conscious choice, he's responsible for it. So it goes for good habits and for bad habits. And this has another effect. How much can you do with your free will? Once a year anyway, in Jewish tradition, you try to make a self-assessment. How am I doing? Usually it's in the fall. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, what are my strong points? What are my weak points? Where do I need to improve? And you set up a plan of improving. And you usually set priorities, because if you're honest and open-minded, the list of things that could be improved gets longer and longer. Okay, 6, 11, 19, And when it gets to 23, you think, but this is hopeless. I said, hopeless. I can't work on everything at the same time. So I have to set priorities given my energy levels and my resources, what's most important for me to work on now, and then I'll work on other things later. Right. Work on other things later when your free will has conquered these. Now, when you're starting with the 19 and you pick 3, then the other 16 you're not responsible for, because you can't do anything about it. You're using your free will already up to its fullest extent on the 3 you chose. But once you conquer those 3 by instilling good habits, and that area of your life remains responsible, then you go to another 3, so your responsibility spreads out. You become responsible for more and more of your life. The more of your life comes under the control of good habits, leaving your free will to work on creating new good habits. So when you start with a life of, let's say, 19 things that have to be improved, and 16 of them you're not responsible for, because you can't work on 19 at one time, over a period of years, you become responsible for more and more of your life. More of your life becomes yours, as opposed to something which is just associated with you. Something that's happenstance, happens to be in your backyard, but it's not something that really expresses who you are. So we have to take into account the indirect effects of free will as well. Are we together so far? Okay, let's try a puzzle which some people raise. Free will means I make my own choices. Free will makes external causation. They could be little choices, what to do for this morning, or my general priorities, or how to spend the next 3 years, or what profession I want to go into. I'm leading my own life. I'm making my own future. How does that fit with a religion that's chock full of instructions, chock full of rules, commandments, which really program a lot of your time and a lot of your priorities, isn't the very fact that Judaism as a life program is full of imperatives, doesn't that mean that I don't really have free will? That it's really all decided for me? That it's something over which I have no control? And this would be an internal contradiction, understand, because Jewish sources say we have free will, and Jewish sources also say, here are the things you have to do. And it would be now a case of not making sense because there's a contradiction in the information. Yeah.
Well, now I was going to answer you. I thought you wanted an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my answer would be quite simple. I mean, I know many people, even myself a while ago, I knew I wasn't supposed to do it. I knew I was told I have to do it. I still didn't do it. It's still completely up to my choice to not do it. Most of my life, I didn't keep Shabbos. I knew I was supposed to keep Shabbos. I didn't keep Shabbos. But I chose on my own way, I want to keep Shabbos.
Okay, I think this is the right answer. The fact that something's right, something's obligatory, something's ideal, doesn't mean that you haven't the freedom to rebel against it. Free will means you make your own decision. It doesn't mean you get to decide what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's not true, what's important and what's unimportant. The Torah lays out the facts of life. It's up to you to decide to live in terms of those facts or not live in terms of those facts. It's like going to the doctor when you have a medical problem, God forbid, and the doctor says, okay, here's the medication, here's the diet, here's the exercise, here's the surgery we have to do. Right? Those are the right things to do. Those are the priorities that are really binding. And as he said, I think he said it very well, he recognized that while he wasn't doing it. So you say, I believe the doctor, I think he's competent, I think I need to do this for my health. Yeah, but, I have a vacation coming up. I'll start when I come back from vacation. Free will is the power to act. It's not the authority to decide what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. So that's the way to answer the question directly. Now, some people say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean I don't have the authority to decide what's right and what's wrong, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done? Who's going to decide if not me? I'm living my life. Don't I have to decide? I'm the one who's, living inside this body. I'm the one who's deciding what this body should do. So if I'm deciding, don't I have to make up my mind? And the answer is, often in Judaism, yes and no. Let me give you a hypothetical scenario and see how you respond to it. Peter is 16, and he's decided that he's going to become a United States Senator. He has an older brother, George, who's 21, and George says to Peter, I know you're 16. I was also 16 5 years ago. I know what it means to be attracted to politics and to have opportunity to make important decisions. But let me tell you something. By the time you're 21, you'll outgrow it. And 16-year-old Peter says, let me live my own life. Leave me alone. Don't tell me what to do. I'm going to be a senator. But by golly, when he's 21, he's giving it up. His brother now is 26. He's giving it up. Now he wants to make $1 million before he's 30. He tells to his older brother, you were right. I see we're right. But now my goal is to make a lot of money. And the older brother says, yeah, you're 21. I've been there, right? I know. But I'll tell you, when you're 26, you won't want that anymore. So what are you talking about? That's what I want. I mean, that's where I'm going. Really? Let's talk in 5 years. 26 says, I've decided that relationships are much more important than $1 million. I want to have a certain kind of really fulfilling relationship. The older brother's 31 now, right? He says, yeah, right? That's about right for 26. But by the time you're 31, you won't want it anymore. Gets to 31, and his interests have moved on. Now, couldn't the younger brother at a certain point say, my older brother's got my number. He's got my number. He predicted 4 times in a row that the choice that I made wasn't going to stick. Maybe this time, if he tells me the choice isn't going to stick, maybe I ought to listen to him. Maybe he knows better than I do what's good for me. So if that's true, then maybe the best choice I can make for myself is to listen to what this authority says is good for me, because this authority knows better than I do what's good for me. And that's a deep insight. Why do you go to a doctor? Just do what your intuition tells you. I'll eat more asparagus and the rash will go away. I mean, maybe yes, maybe no, but that's what I think. That's what I feel. What I feel. That's the most important thing in the world, isn't it? Remember the legend on Diet Coke? If it feels good, do it. I can't think of a more humanly corrupt piece of advice. In other words, just be an animal. That's all. If it feels good, do it. Don't think about it. The consequences, don't analyze where it's coming from, don't analyze who said so and who disagrees. Just do it because it feels good. So at a certain point, a person could say, you know what decision I'm going to make for myself? I'm going to make the decision to follow X because X knows better than I do what's good for me. So that it comes out that living your own life and making your own decisions isn't a contradiction to pledging allegiance to something else, which passes this test of being more realistic than you are. Yeah.
So when it comes to the mitzvahs, the commandments and stuff that we're supposed to do, it seems like we have more free will there, but when it comes to like the Yitzhar, for instance, right? I'll give an example of like eating food, right? You don't need that food, but you're being pulled to eat that food even though you don't actually need it. It's not the best example, but
well, I don't know why it's not the best example. The Yetzer Hara has different forms, the evil inclination, and different strategies. But I think you're right, and what he says is a similar sentiment. And I think it's very important to recognize this, that a person can, with full knowledge, do something that he knows is wrong. There were those who contested this. Plato said no, and Aristotle said yes. Aristotle spoke about weakness of the will. It's called in Greek akrasia. I think this is really a part of everyone's everyday life. At least when you see it in other people, it's harder to recognize it in yourself. But having been a professor, I know it from the experience of the students, some of whom only study for the exam on the night before the exam. And many of them curse themselves out. I got a B minus. I could have gotten an A minus or an A if I had studied 3 days before. And next exam period, I'm going to study before. I really am. I'm committing myself to that. And then comes the next exam period. So that's the same thing again. He has no doubt that it's wrong. He's not fooling himself. I'll get away with it this time. This time the questions will be exactly the ones that I prepared, not the ones I didn't prepare. He's not that stupid. He's not that self-deceptive. Some people are, but a lot of people aren't. You can look the bad thing in the face, and you can do it anyway. People don't go to the dentist, and every time they finally go, it costs them more money and more pain and more time, and they don't go. So it is possible that you decide against what you know to be right. And that means that's the starting point. But then, the next point, what I was working on now for the last 7 minutes, was you aren't the authority on what's right. You may have to, in the last make the decision, but one of the things about deciding what's right is also deciding your own limitations and deciding who has the information that's better than you. And also to be a little critical of the sources of information. A couple of years ago, I was giving a shiur here as an external group, people who aren't part of the yeshiva, and I made various statements, and they were Googling them right away to check. And one said, "You're wrong because it says." And I said, "He's wrong." Who's he? Someone he put up a page, and Google found the page. So what? I happen to know the subject well, so I happen to know that he was wrong. But you have to be very cautious. And same thing with AI. The number of stupidities which I have been able to get out of AI is and I'm not the only one. There are lots and lots of places where AI makes terrible mistakes. Never trust AI. The only thing you use AI for is discovering another possibility you hadn't thought of to check out on your own and verify. But to trust it as true because AI provided it, you'll get into terrible trouble about that. I know certain research programs that are using AI in certain ways where it can't be checked because it's reacting to a gigantic amount of information which can't be humanly checked. And I want to know how they check that the AI isn't making terrible mistakes in its calculations which don't show up because you don't know the truth about the information. Anyway, so we have to, it's an interesting question, how you decide what has authority and how you decide to test it and apply it. But one thing for sure, you don't just simply say that I have the authority because I have to make the decisions. Now, how much free will do we have? Can we measure the amount of free will we have? At least maybe more or less, even if there aren't units, but you could talk about more or less free will. And there are two different ways in which you have more or less free will, which I want to put on the table. One is, how many alternatives do you have when you're facing a choice? That depends upon a lot of factors. First of all, it depends on what you know. I need to get out of here and the door is locked. How am I going to get out of here? Banging the door, nobody's answering, and there's no keyhole. Then suddenly it catches my eye. There's a button on the side that says exit. Oh, yeah, push the button and it opens up. If I hadn't seen the exit button, I wouldn't have had that alternative. Now that I saw it, I have another alternative. So knowledge creates differences in your free will. Sometimes by providing you with alternatives that you didn't know you had, and sometimes by depriving you of alternatives that you thought you had. Because you may learn that what looked like an alternative has consequences that you don't want to bear. So you set up a portfolio and you're investing your money, and then it turns out that someone has secret information that this guy who runs that corporation isn't reliable. He knows because he knows the guy, but nobody else knows. Oh, wow. I thought I had a safe portfolio, but this was going out because I now know that I'm taking a chance I didn't realize before. So information affects the number of alternatives that you have open, and you can certainly say the more alternatives you have, in a certain sense, the more free will you have. Also, there's the difficulty of making the choice. This goes back to the question of putting a gun at a person's head. The guy with the gun says, "Bow to the idol." Gee, I was here walking through on my way to the train. He says, "Bow to the idol." Before he put the gun at my head, I would just walk by. It wouldn't cost me anything. Now, to walk by means that's my last walk. I'm not going anywhere. It certainly has changed the outcome, certainly changed the consequences, and makes walking by much, much more difficult than it was before. Before it was my trip to the train, and now it's the end of my life. So when a decision becomes much more difficult to take, that affects the impact of my free will on my responsibility. The harder it is to do the right thing, the more credit you get for doing the right thing, and the less blame you accrue for doing the wrong thing. Let me put it this way. Let me put it in an extreme case so the point will be, I think, transparent. Let's suppose that there's a challenge in front of someone where to pass the challenge, you've got to do something heroic. If he does it, he's a hero. If he doesn't do it, what is he? Well, he's someone who failed to be a hero. Is that a big failing, to fail to be a hero? I don't think so. Being a hero is extraordinarily difficult. And so like saying, well, you didn't get 100, did you? You only got 97. Is that a failure because you didn't get 100? No. You got a 77, that might be a failure. Not a 97. Because getting 100 is very, very difficult. So if you fail to do something very, very difficult, the failure becomes much, much less significant. So when it becomes much harder to do something, that changes the responsibility so that failure is much less significant and success is much more significant. So when people change the outcomes, and that's why you do it. You do it in order to influence the person's decision. You offer a person money to do something. Well, the fact that you'll earn money is a normal motivation. So you'll have more psychological motivation for doing it. If it's wrong, then it'll be harder to resist. Some people will make the effort to resist and some people won't. And that's how people get paid to do things that are wrong. So free will is determined by both of these factors. Now, some of these factors you can change on your own. You can use your free will to expand your free will. For example, let's imagine a person who knows he should be sympathetic to others. He knows that it's written in books that that's the right thing to be. He just feels cold. He just doesn't feel it. Well, there are books, typically biographies or even novels, of people who suffer. And if the writer is a good writer, you acquire a certain secondary, what's called vicarious experience of the suffering. If you have that experience, you look at those people differently. Wow, that's what they're going through. And then you say, wow, if I see somebody who's going through that, I have to help him. Before you didn't feel it because you didn't know what it felt like. Literature can do that. It can give you that feeling, so now you know what it feels like. And you relate to those other people in a different way. You now have more motivation to do the right thing, and thereby doing the right thing becomes easier. So this way you change the freedom that you have in the use of your free will. Now, obviously you get more credit for doing the things that are hard because you had to make a bigger effort to do it. The things that are easy, you get less credit for doing. But that doesn't mean you should look down on the things that are less difficult to do. Indeed, if you are starting a course of serious self-development, many will suggest, even some psychologists, as some of you know, I don't pledge allegiance to psychology. There may be some true insights there, but there's a lot of chaff among the wheat. It's a good idea to start with easy problems, easy changes, easy developments, because first of all, when you have success, even small successes, and they come regularly, you get used to being a success. You get used to being in progress, being in development. And just like in the laws of motion, you have such a thing as inertia. And inertia says that a thing continues in its state of motion unless it's influenced by an external force. If you build up inertia of changing and growing, so then that carries you from stage to stage, unless something gets in your way. But in the meantime, it's something that's pushing you forward. So you shouldn't despise the things that are easy to do, and you use them as stepping stones, ultimately, to do things that are hard to do. I mean, two simple examples are learning a new language. You don't learn a new language by reading whole paragraphs and deciphering whole paragraphs. You start with vocabulary, you start with basic sentence structure, basic semantic structure, and then you take things apart piece by piece. Same thing in athletics, right? You don't start your football training by running touchdown passes. There's a lot of athletics to do and a lot of coordination to learn before you start actually involving yourself in complicated plays. There's a way to do it in such a way that you can develop from step to step. The steps are cumulative. You accumulate more understanding, more ability, and you build on it. So the same thing is true here. Yes, the significance will come from the harder decisions, and they will come, but it's a counsel of wisdom to be prepared for the harder decisions. And you prepare yourself for the harder decisions by starting with the easier decisions and building up that background. There's also a deep question here, which I'm just going to mention. I'm not going to talk about now in detail, but you can divide your life in many different ways. But one way to divide it is between action on the one hand and your character on the other hand. Both are subjects of development. You want to do good actions, right actions, actions that have good effects, and you also want to have good character, good values. And the two are largely independent of one another. So, for example, you can have a very strong impact on a person's actions simply by being very efficient at catching people doing the wrong thing and punishing them. If the person realizes it's overwhelmingly likely that he's going to get caught, he's going to be punished for what he does, he won't do it. His actions will become good actions. They really will be good actions. His character remains undeveloped because he's only doing the good actions to save himself from the consequences. Ultimately, a person wants to become one who does what's right because it's right, does what's good because it's good. That's what's called virtue. On the other hand, a person may develop good character, develop good motivation, but usually our motivation is mixed. And in addition to good character, good motivation, we also have other types of motivations which aren't good. And life is a struggle, and at least for a period of time, the values are there. It's just that the other parts of life make it very difficult to act on the values. Just as he said before, he spent years knowing that he should keep Shabbos and didn't keep it anyway. So his value was right. He understood the truth. It's just that he was facing a very, very difficult battle. And sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes it's impossible and you aren't responsible for failure. So the two are independent and both of them have to be goals. It's not enough to just put yourself in a position where you do the right thing. Indeed, let's imagine a person who could have implants in his brain and receive neural impulses which cause him to do various things, and then hand over his life to the programmer who's sending the impulses and tell him, just give me impulses that will enable you to do good things. And then you become a robot. That's not a success, a total moral success. Because a total moral success requires good moral agency. And that person's given up agency altogether. That's not what we're looking for the ultimate success. So you want free will to be there, you want it to be in play, and you want it to be used to build towards the right conclusions as best possible. So that's one element of free will. Now, there is a famous old chestnut about free will. I'll mention it to you now. I'll try to describe the problem for you, and then I'll leave you 24 hours, 23 hours to think about it. And tomorrow, Mr. Hashem, I'll show you how to handle it. One of the qualities that the Creator has is to be all-knowing, omniscient, knows everything. Everything, including what people do, just more facts about the world. And indeed, the Creator was omniscient even yesterday. Being omniscient means he knows the whole, the past, present, and future. So let's see. I'm now making a decision to raise my hand or not. I do this from time to time. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it stays down. I don't know what's going to happen until the last minute when I decide what to do. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, up. It went up this time. Did God know yesterday that today my hand was going up? I mean, I suppose so. I mean, yesterday he knew everything, including the past, present, and future. Which way my hand went when I counted from 4 to 0, was one of the things that happened. And he even knew that yesterday. Well, if he knew yesterday what I'm going to do today, did I really have free will to make the decision? Doesn't it sound like there might be a problem here, somewhere in the vicinity? Now let me spell out the problem for you in the correct, precise way to spell it out. Maimonides spells it out in this way, and it's presaged in the Mishnah. And in the beginning of the 20th century, there were some philosophers who worked hard to get it right, and after 20 or 30 years of discussion, finally got to the same formulation that Maimonides had 900 years before. Of course, they didn't read Maimonides. That was their problem. But here's how it goes. I'm making a free decision. The way it appears to me is I have two possibilities. It could be 17. Let's stick with two, A and B. Both are in my power. Both are possible for me. What's going to happen depends upon what I choose. If I choose A will happen. Choose B will happen. Now, as a matter of fact, I choose A. Well, that means yesterday God knew I was going to choose A. Now, here's the question. Was it really possible for me to do B? Here we are. I really do A. Yesterday, God knew I was going to do A. Could I, instead of that, have done B? Wouldn't my doing B today contradict God's knowledge yesterday that I was going to do A? Isn't God's knowledge perfect? Infallible? Necessarily correct? Even if I had the possibility of doing B today, that would mean there's the possibility of God's knowledge yesterday being wrong. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound right. So it seems that really I couldn't possibly have the free will to do B. But if I don't have the free will to do B, then I'm not really making a choice between two alternatives. By the way, one of the ways that people describe free will is free choice. That's an interesting way to put it. A free choice means there are two alternatives and I choose which one it's going to be. But it seems with our picture, there aren't really two. Maybe I think there are two, but I'm making a mistake. There aren't really two. It's sort of like a person's put in a room, and there are two doors, and he says, you could choose one, but only one, and if you get the open one, you go out, otherwise, you're not getting out. Pick one to choose. So he picks one to choose, and he goes over and it opens up. I said, good thing you picked that one, because you didn't have another choice. The other one wasn't the door. Just painted on the wall. Nothing there. You didn't have a choice between two doors. It just looked like a door, but it wasn't. If it had gone there, it'd been all over, you just wouldn't have gotten out. So that's the way it looks to the critic. I know what you say. You say you could have done A or B, and you say you chose A. You said that's why A happened. But if you are a believer and you believe that yesterday God knew you were going to do A, you really couldn't do B. B wasn't a real door. B was just painted on the wall. You weren't choosing between two alternatives. And if that's what you think free choice is, to choose between two alternatives, both of which were in your hands, you're making a mistake. You're not really doing that. That's the question that the critic puts. So I'm going to leave you to think about that. It has some ins and outs. I think there are two different ways to respond to it. I think one is a solution and the other is a dissolution, but neither of them. Now, of course, you could always cheat and look at my recordings on the subject, which are online. I don't mind, but I think if you think about it and talk about it, you might, gain some familiarity with the ideas. And tomorrow, Mr. Hashem, I'll talk about it to you.